Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode, we're talking about college football Week 12 predictions and picks for the top 25. So we're going to review, and of course, if you don't know, each week I collect all of the current 2017 college football data, and all terms and definitions are in the description. So if you're new to the channel, you're new to the stuff that I talk about when it comes to data and analytics, when it comes to the college football level and how it predicts football games and all that other kind of stuff, you can watch previous videos. You can also look at the terms and definitions, and I'll do my best to kind of explain kind of how things stack up. But first, let's review week 11. So week 11 went 11-5, 11-5 specifically. Games that were not picked correctly. Stanford versus Washington was one of those games that wasn't exactly picked correctly. That was, I think it was more so just the fact that Washington didn't play the toughest of schedules. When I was looking at the game specifically, Washington definitely had the upper hand, but there was a lot of things pointing towards the fact that Washington did play a fairly non-tough schedule up to that point. So that was just one of those games where I just had a feeling that maybe Stanford could get an upset and other kind of stuff. Again, I'm after the season's over, I'm going to try to dig a little deeper into these matchups and these losses to kind of see what's going on. But that's just kind of my general theory on that. Iowa State versus Oklahoma State, the only thing I could say is that Iowa State doesn't really do well against offenses. I mean, Iowa State is a very defensive-heavy type of team. And when the defense is able to actually force opponents and stop opponents, they do pretty well. When they get into an offensive shootout where they have to keep pushing the tempo, pushing the ball, all the other kind of stuff, they don't do so well. And they had that issue against they've had that issue against a bunch of different teams. But this one game in particular obviously didn't go their way. And then of course you have Georgia Tech versus Virginia Tech. That honestly was a pretty big surprise, pretty big difference between both those teams ultimately. Then, of course, Oklahoma versus TCU. Most of the data favored TCU, but Oklahoma is pretty close in terms of, the overall data did have that game pretty tight. And then finally, you have Miami versus Notre Dame, which was another game that was pretty tight. And, of course, Miami ended up having a very statement win kind of game in that particular matchup. So, definitely interesting. Very interesting week of football in terms of figuring out who's the best in the Final Four. Now let's get to the picks this week. So these are the matchups this week for the top 25. The only game I did not include is Alabama versus Mercer because Mercer is a FCS program, and I do not currently have a way to compare FCS program data to FBS program data. This is all specifically FBS related data. So starting with the first matchup, South Florida versus Tulsa. Pretty easy. Most of the data favors South Florida, so no biggie there. Auburn versus Louisiana Monroe. This game in particular, Auburn's obviously heavily favored. Michigan versus Wisconsin. Wisconsin's heavily favored here for the most part. Virginia versus, Miami versus Virginia. Miami is favored here pretty significantly. TCU versus Texas Tech. TCU is favored. Arkansas versus Mississippi State. Mississippi State is favored. Memphis SMU has it for pretty close. 63.08 for Memphis, 60.62 for SMU. The team I would actually go with is Memphis because, one, they've been winning, and two, they're a little bit better on defense, slightly. So that definitely kind of goes in their favor. Then, of course, we have Texas versus West Virginia. And in this game, Texas is actually favored. Very surprised by this, but that's just kind of how the data kind of goes there. Temple versus UCF has it for UCF. Pittsburgh versus Virginia Tech has it for Virginia Tech by a heavy margin. Then, of course, you have the next slate of games. Baylor, Iowa State has it for Iowa State. Navy versus Notre Dame. Notre Dame, obviously. Iowa, Purdue. Most of the data in this game favors Iowa. Illinois, Ohio State. Ohio State's favored. Georgia, Kentucky. Georgia is favored in this game. Kansas State. Oklahoma State has it for Kansas State. Very, very close. Honestly, I would go Oklahoma State. Always go with offenses, at least anecdotally. Once the season's over, I'll do more kind of cross multivariate kind of comparisons to kind of see if there's anything that kind of pops out. But I've just seen this tendency that teams that are very offensive heavy typically are going to one-up teams that are more balanced. Kansas State is a more balanced football team, whereas Oklahoma State is more offensive driven, and those teams usually win against those balanced types of teams, but we'll see. Then, of course, you have Kansas versus Oklahoma. Obviously, Oklahoma's favored pretty substantially. Then, of course, you have Nebraska versus Penn State. Penn State favored here by a pretty decent margin. Maryland versus Mississippi State. And this matchup has it for, just look at the, Maryland versus Michigan State has it for Michigan State. Then, of course, you have UCLA versus USC. USC is favored. And then, finally, Utah versus Washington, where Washington is favored. So these are the picks for this week. This is the cheat sheet for this week. This basically just has all the wins, losses, all the sort of picks, for the week in terms of all the picks are just kind of right there as a cheat sheet. And yeah, this is going to be a very interesting week of football, guys. Not a lot of top 25 versus top 25 matchups this week. Lots of top 25 teams versus lesser known teams. I'm not going to say upset alert, but it would be very unlikely for there to be a lot of upsets this week. I mean, you saw just some of the margins or differences between, like Oklahoma versus Kansas. If Oklahoma loses to Kansas, that would just be amazing. Like that would be one of those crazy, ridiculous type of prediction games. Like what variable did you look at that led you to that conclusion? I guess is all I'm trying to say. But that's basically how the data is kind of shaping up right now. And of course, my name is James Coburn. You can find my other work at giraffecoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know. And I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.